The man who wrestled with God and lived to tell the story. According to the Bible. There are moments in life when your soul doesn't want to sing. When you reach a point where the prayers feel hollow, the nights too long, and the answers from heaven seem to be lost in the silence. And in those moments, when everything you've believed is pressed against everything you fear, you find yourself not kneeling quietly in devotion, but wrestling with your faith, wrestling with your past, wrestling, maybe, with God Himself. This isn't the kind of faith they paint on church walls or stitch into throw pillows. It's not neat, not tidy. It's not dressed in perfect Sunday smiles. No, this is raw, honest, agonizing faith. The kind that clutches at God not because you're so confident, but because you have nowhere else to go. Because your soul is tired, your strength is gone, and yet something inside you won't stop reaching for Him. The Bible doesn't hide these stories. In fact, it highlights them. One of the most powerful moments in all of Scripture isn't a miracle or a grand act of obedience, it's a fight. A literal, physical, spiritual fight between a man and the Almighty. One long, painful night where a man named Jacob wrestled with God until the break of dawn. And the most shocking part? He survived. Not only did he survive, he was changed, transformed, marked forever by the struggle. He walked away limping. Yes, but he walked away blessed. That story, it's more than ancient history. It's not just about a man in the desert thousands of years ago. It's about you and me. It's about every believer who's ever asked, God, where are you? And stayed in the struggle long enough to see the morning. Because sometimes the deepest faith doesn't look like peace, it looks like persistence. This is the story of Jacob, the man who wrestled with God and lived to tell the story. But it's also the story of anyone who's ever dared to cling to God in the dark. And if you're listening today, maybe it's because you've been wrestling too. Maybe your life hasn't made sense in a while. Maybe you've been running. Maybe you've been broken. But here's the promise. God isn't afraid of your questions. He's not scared of your doubts. And He's not standing far away waiting for you to figure it out sometimes. He steps into the ring with you. So let's go there, into the night, into the story, into the fight that changed everything. Because on the other side of the wrestle, something sacred waits. Long before Jacob wrestled with God, he was wrestling with himself. From the moment he entered the world, gripping his twin brother Esau's heel, as if trying to win the race to be born first, Jacob was already striving, already grabbing for something more. That moment, symbolic and strange, would become a pattern that followed him his entire life. Reaching, tricking, running, always chasing something he didn't yet have. Jacob's story isn't one of instant obedience or flawless character. He was a man shaped by longing and driven by fear. His name, Jacob, literally means supplanter, heel grabber, or in modern terms, the one who tries to get ahead by pulling someone else back. And that's exactly what he did. He tricked his brother out of his birthright with a bowl of stew. Then, with the help of his mother Rebekah, he disguised himself as Esau and deceived his blind father Isaac to steal the blessing meant for the firstborn. And then he ran. That's how Jacob handled life's consequences. He didn't stand and face them, he fled. After cheating Esau, he fled to his uncle Laban's house in Haran. There, he would spend years trying to build a life, to win love, to carve out his own version of success. He would work 14 years for the love of his life, Rachel, and be tricked himself along the way. In many ways, the deceiver was deceived. The runner was made to wait. And still, Jacob kept running emotionally, spiritually, avoiding true confrontation, not just with others, but with his own heart. There's something painfully familiar about Jacob's journey. We too often spend our lives running from pain, from failure, from the people we've hurt and the things we regret. Sometimes we even run from God, not with our feet, but with our hearts. We distract ourselves, numb ourselves, Build plans so complex that we don't have to face the one thing that scares us most. The truth about who we really are, but the truth never stays buried. And God, persistent, loving, holy, doesn't leave runners to their own devices forever. He lets the chase go on for a time. He allows us to tire ourselves out trying to earn what only grace can give. And then, in a moment we never expected, he intercepts us. For Jacob, that moment would come years later. After building wealth and family and status, after exhausting himself in pursuit of everything he thought would fill the hole inside, would be called back to face Esau, back to the brother he wronged, back to the land he fled from. And something in him knew this wasn't just a geographical return. It was a spiritual reckoning. God had allowed Jacob to run, but not forever. Now the night was coming, and with it, the wrestle that would change his life. The hardest nights are the ones no one sees, when the people around you are asleep or gone, when the noise fades and the silence presses in like a weight on your chest, when there's no one left to call, no distraction left to cling to. Just you, your thoughts, your fear, and God. That's where Jacob found himself, on the edge of a river called Jabbok, with the weight of his past behind him and the fear of his future staring him in the face. He had just received news that Esau, his brother, the one he cheated and ran from, was coming to meet him. With 400 men, panic set in, old guilt resurfaced. Jacob, the planner, the strategist, started scrambling. He divided his camp into two, thinking, if one is attacked, the other might escape. He sent gifts ahead, trying to appease Esau. He prayed, yes, he did pray, but you could hear the trembling in his voice. Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother. And then came the night. Jacob sent everyone else across the river, his family, his servants, all his possessions. And for the first time in a long time, Jacob was truly alone. Sometimes God orchestrates moments like this, not to abandon us, but to isolate us. Not as punishment, but as preparation. Because there are some encounters with God that happen only in solitude. There are some battles that no one can fight for us. Some fears that can't be soothed by a spouse, or money, or a well-worded prayer. Some moments when God doesn't speak, through a burning bush or a parting sea, but through silence and struggle. Jacob didn't know what was coming that night. He didn't expect to meet God in the form of a man who would grab him in the dark. But it was in that solitude, when every distraction was stripped away, that he was finally ready. Maybe you've had nights like that, or maybe you're in one now. Nights when you feel God has withdrawn, but he's actually drawing near. Nights when you feel abandoned, but you're actually being positioned for encounter. It's in those long, lonely hours that something in us becomes desperate, not for escape, but for truth, for transformation, for God. Jacob was finally out of moves, no more deals, no more schemes. And that's when the real wrestle began, because sometimes God has to get you alone to show you who you really are and who he really is. And in the shadows of that riverbank, in the stillness of that night, God didn't come to comfort. He came to confront. It came without warning. No thunder, no lightning, no voice from heaven. Just a figure in the dark, manlike in form, but divine in presence, grabbing Jacob with force. It wasn't an attack by Esau. It wasn't a wild animal. It was something far more terrifying and intimate. It was God. And suddenly, the man who had spent his whole life wrestling in metaphor was now doing it literally. Grappling, clenching, locking arms in a fight he couldn't fully understand. It was night. The struggle was physical, yes, but it was also spiritual. Jacob wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for something deeper, for clarity, for identity, for blessing, maybe even for forgiveness. And here's the mystery. God fought back, not in cruelty, not to destroy Jacob, but to meet him exactly where he was, in the tension, in the questions, in the need. God could have crushed him with a word, but he didn't. He engaged Jacob, matched him. Let the struggle unfold all night. Not because God was weak, but because he was willing to stoop, willing to meet Jacob in his desperation, willing to be wrestled. This moment rewrites how we think about faith. We often think of faith as passive submission. But Jacob shows us another side, the side that holds on with trembling hands and refuses to let go. The side that says, I won't stop praying. I won't stop seeking. I won't stop asking, not because I'm worthy, but because I'm desperate. Desperation is not irreverence. It's not rebellion. Sometimes it's the most honest form of worship. And God honors it. Jacob wasn't wrestling a stranger. He was wrestling the only one who had the power to give him what he needed. And somewhere in the fight, something shifted. This wasn't just about fear anymore. This was about transformation. God was pulling something out of Jacob, not just sweat and effort, but surrender. Not a surrender of giving up, but the kind that says, I'm done pretending, I'm done running. I need you, God, more than I need air. So they wrestled until dawn, until Jacob's muscles ached, until his heart was exposed, until his soul, stripped of pride and trickery, clung to God alone. And when God saw that Jacob would not let go, even in exhaustion, even in pain, he did something that only God can do. He touched Jacob's hip and dislocated it. A single touch. That's all it took. Not a blow, not a strike, just a touch. That's the power God always had, but he had waited to use it. Why? Because the struggle wasn't for God's benefit. It was for Jacob's. Jacob's hip popped out of socket. Pain surged through his body. And still he clung. I will not let you go, he said, unless you bless me. That right there, that is the moment the wrestle changed from a fight to a plea. It was no longer about resistance. It was about holding on. Not out of strength, but from total dependence. And God, in that holy instant, looked at this broken, desperate man and said something strange. What is your name? Why ask that? God knew Jacob's name, of course he did. But he wanted Jacob to say it, to confess it, to admit, I am Jacob, the deceiver, the runner, the one who took what wasn't mine. And in that confession came redemption. You shall no longer be called Jacob, God said, but Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed. A new name, a new identity, not based on deception, but destiny, not shaped by trickery, but by encounter. Jacob walked into the night as one man and limped out as another. Yes, limped. That wound never healed. For the rest of his life, Jacob walked with a limp. And that limp, instead of being a curse, became a sacred reminder. A mark that he had met God, that he had fought and survived, that he had been changed not just in body but in soul. We don't like wounds. We try to hide them, avoid them, fix them. But some wounds aren't punishments. Some are proof that we've been through something real. That we've met God not just in songs and sermons, but in sweat and struggle. That we held on when it would have been easier to walk away. The limp was a gift, because every step reminded Jacob, I am not who I used to be. I am Israel now. I am the one who wrestled with God and lived. And maybe, just maybe, your limp is your blessing too. Maybe that scar you carry, the one that still aches when you think of what you've been through, it's not weakness. Maybe it's evidence that God didn't abandon you, that you were willing to go through the valley, that you didn't let go. And even when you lost something, God gave you more. You may not walk the same. You may not look the same. But you're marked now, changed, blessed, and nobody can take that from you. The fight broke Jacob, but it also built him. And the man who limped out of Peniel, he wasn't a deceiver anymore. He was chosen. The sun was rising as Jacob limped away from the place he named Peniel, face of God, because, as he said, I have seen God face to face, and yet my life was spared. He was physically broken, spiritually reborn. But one thing remained. Esau, the moment Jacob had feared, still waited for him. The brother he had betrayed. The anger he had fled. The reckoning he couldn't outrun. But this time, Jacob didn't run. He looked up and saw Esau approaching with 400 men. And instead of hiding, instead of scheming, he bowed. 7 times he bowed to the ground as he walked toward Esau, posture of humility, posture of peace. This wasn't the Jacob who once manipulated and maneuvered. This was a man transformed by God, leading his family not with fear, but with faith. And then something nobody expected happened. Esau ran to meet him, not with a sword, but with open arms. He embraced Jacob, threw his arms around his neck, kissed him, and wept. That moment, that embrace, was nothing short of a miracle. Esau had every reason to hate Jacob, but God had been working behind the scenes, not just in Jacob, but in Esau too. God didn't just change Jacob's heart, he softened Esau's. That's the power of divine timing. The wrestle wasn't just about Jacob's identity. It was about preparing his heart to face the very thing he feared most. Because once God changes you, he often changes what's around you. The danger that seemed inevitable melted in mercy. The conflict Jacob dreaded became the stage for restoration. And the brother he thought he'd lost forever forgave him. But let's not overlook this truth. The miracle of Esau's forgiveness followed the wrestle. Jacob didn't receive that blessing before the struggle. He received it because of the struggle. The limp, the night of pain, the surrender, it all prepared him for that moment. You see, we often want God to fix the outside first, to remove the threat, to open the door, to calm the storm. But God's priority is the inside. He cares about who we become in the dark, so that when the sun rises and the world watches, we show up differently. Jacob faced Esau changed, not because the fear disappeared, but because he finally knew who he was, Israel, God's own, a man marked by grace. And because he clung to God in the night, he walked into the day with peace. We think of blessing as something clean, comfortable, beautiful, a well-wrapped gift, a happy ending. But the story of Jacob tells a different truth, one that every soul walking through fire needs to hear. The blessing didn't come instead of the struggle. It came through it. Jacob's blessing wasn't given while he was strong and in control. It came when he was broken, limping, clinging. It came not because he knew all the answers, but because he refused to let go. That is faith. Faith isn't always neat. Sometimes it looks like wrestling all night. Sometimes it sounds like, I won't let you go until you bless me. Sometimes it feels like your hip is out of socket and your heart is full of questions, but your soul is still reaching for God. That kind of faith doesn't impress the world, but it touches heaven. You might be in a wrestle right now. Maybe not with an angel in the dark, but with circumstances, with grief, with fear, with silence. Maybe you feel like you're holding on by a thread. And maybe you're wondering, does God see me? Does he care? Yes, friend, he sees, he cares. And if you're in a fight, it's not to destroy you, it's to define you. The wrestle is not your end. It's your transformation. Jacob came out of that night different, not just because he limped, but because he clung. And you can too, even if you're exhausted, even if you're scared, even if you don't know what tomorrow brings. Cling anyway, because the God who wrestled with Jacob is still the God who meets us in the dark, still the God who blesses broken people, still the God who gives new names, new stories, and new mercy. With every morning, you may not walk away looking the same. You may not get the exact answers you prayed for. But if you stay with him, if you refuse to let go, you will walk away, blessed, marked, seen, known, like Jacob. You will be able to say, I saw God, I wrestled, and I lived. Because the deepest blessings are reserved not for those who never struggle, but for those who never stop clinging to him through the struggle. And that Dear friend, is the miracle of the man who wrestled with God and lived to tell the story.